Have you ever felt the absence of noise more intimate than the presence of words? Watched a woman alone in her own quiet, not shrinking, not waiting, not broken, but radiant in a way that unsettles even silence itself? There is something haunting about her calm, something that does not ask to be understood, but compels you to feel. She does not fill space. She honors it. And in that honoring, she becomes untouchable in a way that is not cold, but holy. The world tries to name her single, independent, difficult, but these names fall like feathers against stone, because what she carries has no label, only weight, and that weight is history, is memory, is shadow turned into shape. She is not merely alone. She is inhabiting her aloneness, not as an absence, but as a temple. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." And perhaps that is the truth most have never dared to ask her. What if she chose this life not because she gave up on being known, but because she refused to be misseen again? She doesn't crave chaos. She's had enough of it. The noise of half-held hands, the expectations curled in someone else's voice, the quiet theft of her own rhythm every time she adjusted to fit. Now, she belongs only to herself. And in that belonging, there is no apology. This is not a rebellion. It is a remembering. Not every woman who walks alone is escaping something. Some are walking towards something so vast, so deep, that to invite another in too soon would dishonor the depth of it. It is not solitude she fears losing, it is herself. And she has lost herself before. Once in love. Once in family. Once in the performance of being enough. But not anymore. So what is the psychological truth? The hidden pattern beneath the choices of women who live alone, not out of circumstance, but out of clarity. This is not a theory. Not a diagnosis. Not a trend. This is a myth breaking its silence. It is a truth whispered in bones, in shadow, in symbols the conscious mind barely remembers. And yet it lives, in every woman who closes her door, lights her own candle, and chooses presence over performance. Let us enter now, carefully, into her world, through the lens of Jung, through the mirror of the unconscious, through the soft hum of what cannot be said, only sensed. Let us begin. The first truth emerges not like a thunderclap, but like a slow unraveling of silence. She no longer fears being alone with herself. That, in itself, is radical. Not because it defies convention, but because it dismantles illusion. Most are never truly alone. They are only away from others. But she sits with her own thoughts as if they are guests to be welcomed, not enemies to be silenced. She walks through the corridors of her inner house without turning on every light, without flinching at the creak of forgotten floorboards. This is the psychological shift Jung spoke of, individuation, the path not of separation but of integration. And she is on it, barefoot and breathing. It begins with self-containment, not isolation, not defense, but a quiet knowing that she can hold her own sadness without outsourcing it, that she can be with longing without mistaking it for lack. In the flicker of early morning, when the world hasn't yet remembered its demands, she pours herself tea and sits. Just sits. No scrolling, no reaching, just presence. A woman at peace with her own frequency. She is no longer startled by her own shadow, because she has sat across from it, night after night, asking not, "How do I fix you?" but, "What do you need me to hear?" This is what Jung called the shadow made conscious. And in her solitude, it does not hide, it rises. Sometimes as melancholy, sometimes as memory, sometimes as unexplainable tension in the chest. But she no longer resists it. She listens. She writes. She breathes into it. Because she has learned that denial is a more violent act than any truth could ever be. The second truth is found not in what she does, but in what she no longer tolerates. Emotional extraction, the subtle ways others once pulled from her, her care, her softness, her ability to intuit what was unspoken and make it easier to bear. She was once praised for this, called nurturing, empathic. But she knows now, sometimes that praise was the wrapping around her erasure. She is done translating herself into languages she does not speak. In her solitude, she reclaims her emotional labor not with bitterness, but with boundaries. You can see it in how she responds to messages, slowly, if at all. In the way she chooses her company, not out of availability, but resonance. You will not find her explaining why she needs space. She simply takes it. And in that quiet, she becomes untouchable in the most sacred sense, not protected by walls, but wrapped in clarity. Carl Jung taught that to individuate is to reclaim the pieces of oneself once given away for safety. And she has, one by one, through quiet refusals, through sacred yes, through the steady rebuilding of her own psychic spine. The third truth is carved into her days through repetition. Her solitude is not stillness, it is ceremony. She moves through her home like a priestess tending to something unseen. Her rituals are not dramatic. She waters her plants with intention. She speaks a single sentence aloud each morning. Sometimes it's a question, sometimes a vow. She wears clothes that feel like memory. She burns incense not to cleanse, but to call herself back. Her solitude is not emptiness. It is space, vast, textured, alive. She doesn't tell others about these rituals. They're not aesthetic. They're ancestral. They are the language of the soul speaking through muscle and breath. And through them, she remembers what the world begged her to forget, that her life is not a performance, but a pulse. The fourth truth does not announce itself. It reveals, quietly, through her gaze. She has stopped performing femininity for survival. What once was an armor of smiles, softened edges, apologetic glances, now falls away like petals past their season. She no longer plays the role of the agreeable, digestible, desirable woman. Not because she is angry, but because she is no longer afraid of being seen as too much or not enough. Her being is not a performance for the comfort of others. It is a presence that no longer edits itself. You notice it in the way she walks. Not rushed, not deliberate, just wholly inhabited. She does not shift her posture when someone passes, does not adjust her tone to make others feel at ease. There is nothing aggressive in her presence, and yet, it confronts. It confronts those still entangled in projections, those who seek a reflection, not a reality. Carl Jung called this the withdrawal of the persona, the mask one wears to function in society. And for her, that mask grew too tight. It cracked. And in its place, something raw stepped forward, her essence. She dresses for how she feels in her skin. Sometimes it's silk against bare flesh. Sometimes it's old denim and shadows under the eyes. But it is never for display. It is for ritual, for grounding, for truth. Her femininity is no longer shaped by someone else's gaze. It is shaped by her own reclamation, from girlhood expectations, from culture's myths, from the subtle demands of being palatable. The fifth truth lives in the liminal hours, those moments when night hasn't yet ended and morning hasn't quite begun. In those hours, she speaks with her ancestors. Not always literally. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes in music that stirs something wordless in her chest. Sometimes in tears that arrive without story. She doesn't need to understand it. She simply makes room. Jung believed that the unconscious carries not only personal material, but collective memory. And she feels it, the lineage of women who lived in silence, in sacrifice, in self-erasure. Their pain whispers through her blood, not to haunt, but to be healed. She honors them not by repeating their lives, but by breaking the spell. She says no where they could not. She rests where they could not afford to. She names truths they swallowed. She feels pleasure without permission. And in doing so, she becomes the turning point, the one who chooses differently. Not because she is stronger, but because she is finally supported, not by anyone else, but by the foundation she has built within. Her solitude is not hers alone. It holds echoes, songs, memory. It is a woven space of past, present, and potential. It is not empty, it is full of every woman who never got to arrive here. And perhaps the most piercing truth, the sixth, is that she no longer sees love as a cure. She used to. She used to ache for a touch that would soothe the ache. A gaze that would say, "You're not too much." But over time, she realized, love that arrives to save you also has the power to erase you. Now, she does not seek to be saved. She seeks to be seen. Fully. Without the need to be softened, translated, managed. She does not close herself off. Her heart still trembles when moved. She still notices beauty. She still feels the pull of connection. But she does not abandon her center to follow it. She no longer leaves herself at the altar of being chosen. If love arrives, it must arrive here, where she already is, whole, complex, unedited. She is not waiting. She is not hiding. She is not unfinished. She is not a question waiting for someone else's answer. The seventh and final truth does not rise like a revelation. It settles like dust after a storm. She has made peace with her own multiplicity. She no longer tries to be consistent for the sake of others' comfort. Some days she is a still lake. Other days, she is fire licking the edges of every thought. Some mornings she wants nothing but silence, and by nightfall she craves music loud enough to drown out her own heartbeat. And all of it is allowed. All of it is her. There is no longer a single version of herself she tries to preserve. No permanent face, no final answer. Instead, she moves through her shifting interiors with a kind of quiet companionship, not trying to fix, just staying close. Jung spoke of the self as the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, and she lives now from that center. Not always clearly, not always cleanly, but with devotion. You see it in the way she speaks about her past, without bitterness, without glorification. Just as a place she walked through. You hear it in her voice when she says "I don't know." Not with shame, but with reverence for the mystery. She is no longer threatened by her contradictions. She trusts them. Because they've taught her more than any single truth ever could. She no longer strives to be inspiring. She just is. Not because she tries to embody wisdom, but because she has allowed herself to be honest. And in that honesty, there is magnetism. The kind that does not pull people in, but invites them to drop deeper into themselves. Around her, people slow down. They choose their words more carefully. They ask different questions. Because her presence suggests, here, there is no need to pretend. The woman who lives alone by choice is not lonely, she is layered. She is not hardened, she is spacious. Her solitude is not a retreat from the world. It is a reclamation of it, on her terms. And what those outside rarely see is that her solitude is not static. It moves. It breathes. It teaches. Some days, she feels the weight of it, the absence of touch, the echo of laughter that once belonged in her kitchen. But she does not reach for distraction. She lets the ache be part of the architecture, because in its hollowness, new music is forming. What emerges, over time, is not someone who is above connection, but someone who has remembered how to connect to herself first. Someone who can walk beside another and not lose her pace. Someone who can love without shape-shifting, without bargaining away pieces of her truth. She no longer fears being alone, because she is no longer afraid of who she becomes in that space. And in that freedom, she has become what the world forgot to imagine, a woman untethered, unfolding, unapologetically whole. These are not merely traits. They are thresholds, markers on a path that is not linear, but spiral, always returning, always deepening. And now, we follow her descent, not into darkness, but into depth, into the wild, the wordless, the womb of everything unspoken that shaped her. It doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a silence that stretches too wide to hold. A moment where everything that once grounded her, the rituals, the boundaries, the small comforts she built like stones in a river, suddenly feel far away. Not gone, just dimmed. The descent does not arrive like catastrophe. It arrives like stillness gone sour. The air feels too thick. Her skin too foreign. The mirror shows a woman she recognizes, but no longer inhabits. And it is here, in the liminal space between who she was and who she cannot yet name, that the unraveling begins. She moves through her day like a ghost of herself, making tea, folding sheets, responding to emails, but underneath, something ancient stirs. She dreams in fragments, keys that don't fit, stairs that collapse, eyes that stare back from behind her own reflection. Her body aches in strange places. The silence she once revered becomes too loud. Her solitude begins to echo with questions she didn't ask, answers she never wanted. This is not depression. It is initiation. Jung spoke of it as the night sea journey, the voyage into the unconscious, where the ego dissolves and the true self waits beneath the waves. And now, she is in it. Not by choice, but by gravity. Something in her has decided it is time to shed what no longer belongs, even if she loved it, even if it once saved her. She feels it in her chest, like a door creaking open in the dark. Her shadow steps forward, not in malice, but in mirror. The part of her that envies, that resents, that still longs to be chosen, despite everything she knows. The part of her that once contorted herself for closeness and still sometimes wants to do it again. She does not push it away. She cannot. It sits beside her on the bed. It stares at her from the shower tile. It hums in her throat when she tries to speak the way she used to. She is no longer certain who she is without the structures that kept her contained. And that uncertainty is terrifying. But it is also true. And truth, she has learned, is always a kind of medicine, bitter before it heals. There is a night, she will not remember the date, when she finds herself lying on the floor, not in pain, but in surrender. The ceiling swims above her. Her breath is shallow, but steady. She is not praying. She is not pleading. She is simply there. With everything. With nothing. With the quiet roar of a self dissolving. She does not rise from the floor transformed. But something does shift. A single thread in the tapestry loosens, and in that loosening, a light slips through. The descent is not over. It has barely begun. But she is not resisting anymore. The days blur. Not in chaos, but in fog. She wakes and forgets what day it is, not because she is disoriented, but because the old markers of meaning no longer apply. The calendar feels like fiction. The clock, an insult. Her life has entered a deeper rhythm now, one dictated not by schedules but by sensation. There are mornings when she can't get out of bed, not from fatigue, but from a weight she can't name. There are evenings when she walks for hours, with no destination, only the ache of movement. And always, beneath it, the same pulse. Something is leaving her. Something she thought was essential, a belief, a behavior, a version of herself, is slipping away. And she lets it. She is no longer interested in fixing what breaks. She wants to feel it break. To hear the crack. To run her fingers over the fault lines and whisper, "Yes, I see you." Carl Jung called this confronting the shadow. Not analyzing it, not improving it, but sitting with it until it becomes less enemy, more messenger. The shadow shows up in unexpected ways. One afternoon, she snaps at a stranger for brushing past her shoulder. The anger feels disproportionate, but also ancient. It isn't about the touch. It's about every time she swallowed her rage, every time she said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. And now, it rises. She doesn't shame it. She doesn't justify it. She feels it. Lets it tremble through her until it tells her what it came for. On another day, she finds herself crying while washing her hands. Just standing there, the warm water streaming down, and the tears slipping without warning. No trigger. No memory. Just grief, raw and rootless, flowing from a place too deep to name. This is not regression. This is release. The unconscious doesn't speak in words. It speaks in water, in weight, in dreams that leave her breathless and strangely healed. She starts forgetting how she used to perform. The smile on cue, the laugh that soothes, the elegant retreat. These habits begin to die, quietly. She no longer bends herself to be received. And in that rigidity, others fall away. Some distance themselves, confused by her change. Others reach for her less often. She notices. It stings. But she doesn't chase. Not anymore. Instead, she begins to cultivate a kind of inner fidelity, a loyalty to her own depth. Even when it isolates her. Even when it means spending another Saturday night in silence. She lights a candle anyway. Not for mood, but for memory. To remember that she is still here. That something sacred is unfolding, even if no one else can see it. And in the silence, she starts to hear it. The voice that is not polite, not spiritual, not aspirational, but real. It does not whisper affirmations. It hums with certainty. You are not who you were. You are not yet who you will be. But you are not lost. She writes that sentence down, tapes it to her mirror. Not as a mantra, but as a map. This is the descent. And she is no longer surviving it. She is beginning to listen. Something begins to settle. Not peace, not clarity, but presence. A kind of bone-deep awareness that no longer seeks explanation. She doesn't need to know why the grief comes when it does, or what the dream of the burning field meant, or whether this ache in her chest is sadness or something else entirely. She just feels it, lives it, lets it shape her in ways that words cannot hold. Her inner life has become a tide, ebbing, crashing, retreating, returning. No longer something she controls. No longer something she fears. This is where the descent deepens. The mind loosens its grip. The soul steps forward, not like a prophet, but like a question that refuses to be answered. She finds herself drawn to symbols she doesn't fully understand. The crow outside her window, the broken shell she picked up from a beach 5 years ago, the dream of her younger self standing barefoot in snow. She starts writing them down. Not to analyze, just to witness. Carl Jung believed that the psyche communicates in image and symbol, that what cannot be explained must be expressed. And so she begins to create, not art, exactly, but markings. She paints in circles. She writes letters to no one. She hums songs that feel remembered, not invented. And in doing so, she discovers something she'd forgotten. She is not meant to be figured out. She is meant to be felt. The world outside grows quieter. Her phone rings less. Invitations dwindle. She could feel abandoned, but she doesn't. She feels free. Not because she no longer needs people, but because she no longer needs to dilute herself to keep them. If someone reaches out, she meets them in truth, not performance. And if they can't stay with that truth, she lets them go, not with resentment, but with breath. She begins to speak differently. Less filler, more pause. Her, "I'm not sure," no longer conceals knowing. It honors mystery. Her, "I don't want to," is a full sentence now, not the beginning of a justification. She doesn't pretend to be okay when she's unraveling. She doesn't ask for forgiveness for taking up space. Her boundaries are no longer barriers. They are expressions of self-respect. And then one morning, something strange happens. She catches her reflection, not in a mirror, but in a puddle outside a cafe, and she doesn't flinch. She doesn't scan for flaws. She just sees herself. Not the woman she was trying to become, not the girl she once abandoned, but herself as she is. Tired, tender, alive. She sits alone at a table by the window, sipping coffee she made herself, watching strangers pass by. A couple laughs. A dog barks. The sun touches her face. And she feels still. No longing. No rush. No script running in the back of her mind. Just presence. Just now. This is not the end of the descent. It's not the ascent either. It's something else entirely. A moment where the inner world stops demanding and starts revealing. A moment where she doesn't need to change anything to belong in her own skin. It is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. But it is holy. The air begins to feel different. Not lighter, but clearer. As if something dense has finally settled to the bottom, leaving the surface still and reflective. She's not ascending. She's not transforming. She's simply arriving, moment by moment, into the body she once fled, the breath she once forgot, the self she once scattered into 1,000 polite shapes. There is no trumpet of triumph, no flash of rebirth. Only this: she brushes her hair slowly. She waters a plant that's just barely alive. She puts on a sweater and feels the warmth before the mirror tells her how she looks. These small acts, they're not self-care. They're self-return. She still feels the ache. Sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, a ghost of all the versions of her that begged to be held, named, chosen. But now, she no longer shames those ghosts. She lights candles for them, not to banish them, but to bless them. She is not healed in the way the world defines it. She still has triggers, still forgets her worth some days, still longs. But her relationship to the longing has changed. It no longer owns her. It walks beside her, like a sister who doesn't need to be fixed, only witnessed. Carl Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." And that's where she stands now, in the wide, sacred space between contradictions, between strength and softness, between solitude and yearning, between knowing and not knowing. She no longer needs to resolve the tension. She just lets it live. And in that tension, she becomes real. There's a kind of magic she never saw coming. She laughs more now, not to ease discomfort, but because life surprises her again. She dances in her kitchen at midnight, barefoot, arms open, not for anyone watching, but because her body remembers joy. She sings, badly. She forgives herself mid-sentence. She stops editing her feelings before they're fully felt. And when someone enters her life, a friend, a stranger, maybe even love, she does not collapse into them. She does not contort. She meets them from the ground of herself, with her shadow visible, her needs no longer disguised as preferences. She no longer falls in love. She stays upright in it. She asks questions without fear. She receives care without apology. And if that love cannot meet her as she is, she lets it go. Gently. Without bargaining. Because now she knows, she does not need to be chosen to be worthy. She does not need to be needed to be real. She already is. There is no final arrival. No perfect clarity. No moment when the descent ends and the light stays constant. But there is this: she walks with herself now. Every version, every ache, every soft edge and sharp corner. She lives alone, yes. But it is not a lack. It is a vow. A sacred agreement to never again abandon the one person who has always been there, beneath every story, every silence, every becoming. She wakes in the soft blur before sunrise, not because something pulls her, but because something within her simply stirs. There is no urgency, no task waiting, just breath, and the quiet understanding that nothing needs to be different for her to belong to this moment. She moves through her home like a hymn, every step a note, every gesture a continuation of the life she no longer performs but inhabits. The kettle sings low. She hums in response. Not a song, but a remembering. The kind of tune the soul makes when it has stopped running. She opens a window and watches the wind stir the curtain. That too is enough. She no longer chases meaning. She lets meaning emerge. From the light touching the floorboards. From the way her fingers wrap around a mug. From the steady rhythm of being. She understands now. Peace is not something she arrives at. It's something she returns to, each time she refuses to abandon herself. This is not triumph. This is not resolution. This is intimacy, with the self she used to overlook, with the life she once tried to escape through love, achievement, or explanation. She does not need a witness anymore to validate her wholeness. She is the witness. And her solitude, once thought to be the price she paid for independence, is now the proof of her belonging. She belongs to herself. In her rhythms. In her contradictions. In the poetry of her ordinary days. And when she looks at herself in the mirror now, it is not with pride or critique, it is with recognition. She is not a masterpiece. She is a mosaic. And every broken edge, every softened scar, every silent vow has shaped her into something only she could become. The woman who lives alone is not empty. She is vast. Not untouched, but fully held. Not hardened, but whole. She no longer measures time in milestones or months, but in the tenderness with which she meets herself, in the gentleness that now fills the places once ruled by harshness. There is a kind of quiet mastery in her, not of others, but of her own energy, her own presence, her own becoming. The world still moves fast, still demands masks, still trades depth for noise, but she no longer bargains with it. She no longer dilutes her voice for belonging, or sharpens her softness to be taken seriously. She speaks when it matters, and when it doesn't, she lets the silence speak for her. She no longer needs to be inspiring to be worthy. Her worth lives in how she breathes, how she forgives, how she watches the evening light spill across her kitchen table like an old friend returning without explanation. And sometimes, in the quiet, she smiles, not because she's happy in the way the world sells it, but because she feels honest, present, here. The wounds have not vanished. They've grown roots. They've become part of her landscape. And she tends to them now like a gardener, not rushing their healing, but trusting their rhythm. There are still days when grief knocks, but she no longer slams the door. She opens it, offers it tea, lets it sit. She knows it won't stay forever. She knows none of it does. That's why she cherishes the slow afternoons, the half-written thoughts, the way the sky folds itself into dusk without needing to explain a thing. She belongs to no one now, not even to the idea of who she once wanted to be. She belongs only to the truth that has weathered every storm inside her. The truth that she is allowed to be whole without being perfect, allowed to be seen without being explained, allowed to live alone and still be complete. Her solitude is no longer a condition. It is her companion. Not a silence to escape, but a mirror that shows her who she truly is when nothing and no one interrupts. She walks now not to get somewhere, but to feel the earth beneath her. The streetlights flicker, the rustle of leaves, the soft pressure of her breath in the cold, all of it belongs to her story now. Not as background, but as witness. There's no longer a need to document, to prove, to archive her moments in case someone else might one day care. She cares. She sees. She holds it all, even the forgotten hours. Especially those. Her life, once scripted by expectation, now unfolds like an open field, wide, wild, unhurried. And when she moves through the world, it is not with resistance, but with reverence. She bows, not literally but inwardly, to the strangers who pass her, to the barista who smiles at her without agenda, to the breeze that brushes her collarbone and reminds her she is still touchable, even without touch. She finds connection now not through attachment, but through presence. She sees others not as roles they play, but as souls in motion. And even when she returns to an empty home, it does not feel empty. It feels sacred, because she is there, fully, unequivocally, softly, alone, but not severed, separate, but not apart. There is no final chapter in this, no conclusion, no arrival, only a slow, ever-deepening relationship with her own being, with her pain, with her peace, with her truth, unpolished, unedited, undenied. This is not a woman who lives alone because she failed to find someone. This is a woman who has walked through every room of herself and refused to lock the doors again, who has faced the ghosts, danced with the ache, made a home of the silence, and come back to say, I am not waiting. I am not hiding. I am not incomplete. I am here. And if you find this echo, if something in these words feels like a window you've been waiting to open, then maybe you're here too, in your own room, your own rhythm, your own quiet revolution. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to name it. Just let it live in you. Let it soften what was once hard. Let it deepen what once scattered. And if you ever forget, return to the breath, to the stillness, to yourself, again and again and again. And if these words found you in a quiet hour, when the world felt far and your soul felt near, let them stay. Let them settle into the folds of your aloneness and remind you, solitude is not a sentence. It is a sanctuary, a mirror that does not distort, a silence that does not betray, a presence that has waited patiently for you to return to yourself. You do not need to be seen to be real. You do not need to be chosen to belong. You do not need to be in love to feel whole. You are the home. And if you ever long for a space that speaks this language, the language of shadow, breath, and becoming, you are welcome to remain here. Subscribe, not as a follower, but as a witness to your own unfolding. This voice will be waiting, not to teach, not to fix, but to remind you, you are not alone in your aloneness. You are sacred in it.